The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you very much. Can I begin by also congratulating the member who clearly wasn't aware she was on the speaking list and made a good contribution to this debate anyway, and also congratulate her on her re-election as the MP for Waitaki. Mr Speaker, I want to congratulate the Right Honourable David Carter for his re-election as the Speaker. He was my opponent in, I think, 6 elections in the seat of Littleton and Banks Peninsula, and more recently in Port Hills. Hasn't been my opponent in the last couple of elections, and obviously isn't going to be now because he's the Speaker. I also want to congratulate Lindsay Tish and the Honourable Chester Burrows and yourself, Honourable Trevor Mallard. It is a pleasure to have you as the rigorous person who, I guess, understands the rules of the House more than anyone else, but also who is intent on having them implemented, which will be a pleasant change from others who just make a passing reference to them during their ruling. I want to congratulate all returning and all new MPs. It's a huge honour to be a Member of Parliament, and with that honour comes a great deal of responsibility, and I look forward to getting to know particularly the new members more and sharing some of our experiences for the betterment of New Zealand. I think we're all in here for the same reason, but we all have different views on how that betterment can be achieved. I want to thank the Labour team in the Port Hills for our campaign. It is a privilege to have been re-elected to represent the Port Hills electorate, regardless of what Scott Simpson said earlier. In relation to his electorate, Port Hills actually is the best electorate in the country, not only because of the Port Hills, the river, the estuary, the harbour. It's really because of the people that it's the best electorate. We've had more than our fair share of challenges over the last few years, and the people of the Port Hills have shown they're up to meeting those challenges and supporting others through it. I pledge to continue to be a strong voice for our electorate, to be accessible and to work hard to progress the aspirations of my constituents. Mr Speaker, I want to acknowledge and thank Christine Bartlett, the Service and Food Workers Union, and Peter Cranny for the victory in the Court of Appeal case on the pay equity legislation. Mr Speaker, this gives the government a real opportunity to make good of at least one of the points they made that has been the subject of this address and reply debate, and that is looking at wage issues. If they can respond to that victory on pay equity with some substantive moves, that would be a huge contribution and recognition of the value of the work that so many women workers do in our nation. I want to support the amendment to the motion before the House, the amendment that was moved by the Honourable Annette King. She talked in her amendment about wanting to see all New Zealand children living in warm, dry homes. She wanted to see the number of affordable homes increased, ensuring that all New Zealanders have access to affordable health care, wages for all rising faster than the cost of living, jobs created, employment back under 4%, exports increasing as a percentage of GDP, the diversification of our economy, the reduction of economic and social inequality, targets to measure and address child poverty, a commitment to a cross-party approach to the elimination of domestic and sexual violence, real measures to address climate change and improve our sustainability, a plan for the recovery of Canterbury, and the government to be guided in their work by the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. If those issues were addressed, if that amendment was supported, then all New Zealanders would indeed have a more positive future to look forward to. All New Zealanders would have an opportunity to contribute to the best of their ability and to have a better future for them and their children. Mr Speaker, I want to touch more specifically on 3 of those points: on child poverty, on housing, and particularly on employment law, as it's so relevant at the moment, being debated as the first piece of legislation the incoming national government wants to progress. Mr Speaker, on child poverty, it really has beggared belief to watch both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance progress after 6 years of total denial of the existence of child poverty in New Zealand, let alone any inclination to want to address it, to suddenly decide that it's going to be a priority for this term. I thought the icing on the cake, though, was when Bill English blamed local government for child poverty. I saw one of the better tweets on this issue when somebody said, "Mum's just got home, opened the door and said, couldn't find a job today, so there's no dinner," and the children screamed, "Damned urban planners." That really spoke volumes about the lack of understanding that Bill English has and his total inability, even after 6 years in government as the Minister of Finance, to take any responsibility at all for the increasing number of children we have in our country living in poverty. 20,000 more children living in poverty since this national government was elected than when they first took office. Mr. Speaker, I hope that the commitment bears some fruit. I doubt that it will after the constant denial, but for the sake of those children who are living in poverty, for the sake of their futures and their children's future, I certainly hope that the national government will deliver on that. In relation to state housing, there was not a mention during the entire election campaign of the government's commitment and plan to sell off 1/3 of our state housing. They are breaking an 80-year-old agreement across all parties in this Parliament that it is a government responsibility to ensure that the most vulnerable in our society have somewhere to live. We've seen an increasing number of people not being able to have access to any home at all, and that's where the government needed to get into that space to say we don't have enough houses to house New Zealand families. We should be building more houses. We should be making sure that all New Zealand families are able to live in a house. It doesn't have to be a flash house, but it should be a decent house. It should be warm and dry. And instead, this government is breaking that 80-year commitment to ensure all New Zealand families are properly housed, walking away and saying it's going to be someone else's responsibility. This is one of the biggest moves, the biggest abandonment of commitment to New Zealanders that I have ever seen a government take. And all the newcomers, all the newbies in the government will just close their eyes and close their ears, abandon the commitments they made when they were standing for election to this Parliament, and support the government selling off 1/3 of state houses. I think it's an outrage, particularly after what both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance said about good organisations like the Salvation Army in this House, said that people like Campbell Roberts, a leader in social policy research and advocacy in New Zealand, Mr English and Mr Key said he didn't know much and he should get out more. That's what they said about the leadership from the Salvation Army, and now they're saying they can be the major providers of social housing in New Zealand. Mr Speaker, I just want to conclude by talking about the employment law. Simon Bridges, who's been speaking during the committee stage on behalf of the government, has clearly no understanding of the history of one of the provisions in the employment legislation we're discussing, which is the right for people to have a break during their working time. He talks about air traffic controllers causing chaos. He talks about small businesses having to close so that the workers can have a break. Mr Speaker, I'm going to challenge him during the next round of the committee stage to give one example where any business or any airport has had to close so that the workers can take a break. This has only been in our legislation for a few short years, the legal right for a worker to have a break. And the first thing this government have done, this incoming national-led government, has taken away that right from New Zealand workers. I think that's wrong, Mr Speaker. It's not as if anybody in the workforce is asking for much, but the right to have a break should be something that this Parliament supports. I don't buy into the argument that bad employers will abuse the law. I buy into the argument that this Parliament should be about making good law, and nothing that this government has signalled as introducing is good law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good speech.